Let me start with a simple question, one we rarely stop to ask. Why do so many people who look successful feel empty? Why do organizations that hit every target still feel broken inside? Why does progress feel faster than ever, yet meaning feels further away? Because somewhere along the way we stopped asking why, and the system didn't. The system learned something important. It learned that controlling your labor is difficult, but shaping your thinking, that's far more efficient. If I can influence what you believe success looks like, if I can define productivity as worth, if I can teach you to chase outcomes without questioning purpose, then I don't need to force you. You'll do it willingly. And that's where the gap begins. The gap between success and fulfillment, between power and purpose, between progress and meaning. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of us aren't exhausted because we work too hard. We're exhausted because we work without clarity of why. Burnout isn't caused by long hours. It's caused by long hours in service of something you don't believe in. Disconnection doesn't happen because people don't care. It happens because systems reward performance over trust, numbers over humans, speed over direction. When organizations obsess over what they do and how they do it, but ignore why, people become tools instead of contributors, resources instead of human beings. And humans were never designed to thrive that way. Look at modern leadership. Too often, it is driven by fear. Fear of missing targets, fear of losing relevance, fear of the next quarter, the next election, the next headline. Fear-based leadership creates compliance, not commitment. It gets short-term results, but long-term damage. Because when leaders prioritize results over people, people stop trusting leaders, and when trust is gone, everything slows down. Innovation dies, collaboration collapses, loyalty disappears. You can mandate behavior, but you cannot mandate belief. The most dangerous systems aren't the ones that overwork people. They're the ones that convince people this is normal, that burnout is the price of ambition, that disconnection is just adulthood, that inequality is inevitable. But systems without purpose don't just fail economically, they fail morally. They forget that business is not about numbers, it's about people. Technology is not about efficiency, it's about service. Leadership is not about being in charge, it's about taking responsibility for those in your care. That's not idealism, that's biology. Humans are wired for trust, for belonging, for meaning. When we feel safe, we cooperate. When we feel valued, we give more than is required. When we believe in the why, we endure the how and commit to the what. And here's the hopeful part, the part the system can't fully control. Purpose is renewable, trust can be rebuilt, leadership can be relearned, but it starts with responsibility, not someone else's, yours. As an individual, ask yourself, why do I do what I do? Not the title, not the paycheck, the deeper reason that makes the struggle worthwhile. As a leader, understand that your job is not to extract value from people, but to create the conditions where people can offer their best, to protect them, to listen, to serve. As a community, we must stop rewarding speed without direction and success without integrity. We must choose long-term good over short-term gain because the systems of tomorrow are being shaped by the beliefs we tolerate today. So here is the call to action. Think longer than the next result. Care deeper than the next reward. Lead not from fear but from purpose. Build organizations that measure trust, not just output. Build cultures where people feel seen, not used. Build lives aligned with something bigger than personal success. Because when you lead with why, you don't just change performance, you change people, and when people change, systems have no choice but to follow. The future does not belong to the most efficient, it belongs to the most purpose-driven. So choose to be a leader who serves, choose to think for yourself, choose to build something that lasts. That is how we reclaim meaning, that is how we restore trust, and that is how we create a system that works for humans, not the other way around. The system shapes beliefs before it controls behavior, because belief is the quietest form of power. When you control what people think is normal, desirable, or inevitable, you no longer need force. You no longer need constant supervision. People will police themselves. They will work harder, tolerate more, and question less, not because they are told to, but because they believe they should. This is the most efficient form of control, invisible, internalized, and self-sustaining. Most systems understand this deeply. They do not begin by demanding obedience, they begin by defining success. They teach us what winning looks like, what failure feels like, and what is worthy of respect. From a young age, we absorb messages about productivity equaling value, busyness equaling importance, and achievement equaling identity. Over time, these ideas stop sounding like instructions and start sounding like truth. Once that happens, behavior follows naturally. People chase goals they never chose, defend structures that don't serve them, and exhaust themselves trying to meet standards that were never designed for human well-being. This belief shaping happens subtly. It shows up in language. We call people human resources, reducing individuals to inputs. We praise hustle without asking what it costs. We glorify sacrifice while ignoring who benefits from it. We reward short-term results so consistently that long-term thinking begins to feel irresponsible. None of this requires coercion. It only requires repetition. When an idea is repeated often enough by authority, culture, and peers, it stops being questioned. It becomes the water we swim in. Once beliefs are shaped, behavior becomes predictable. If people believe their worth is tied to performance, they will overwork. If they believe rest is laziness, they will feel guilty for stopping. If they believe leadership is about power rather than service, they will compete instead of collaborate. The system doesn't need to demand these behaviors because they feel self-generated. That's the illusion. People think they are making free choices, when in reality they are choosing from a narrow menu of options defined by the system's values. This is why changing behavior without addressing belief rarely works. You can offer wellness programs, flexible hours, and motivational slogans, but if the underlying belief remains that output matters more than people, nothing truly changes. People may smile more, but they won't feel safer. They may comply, but they won't commit. Behavior is a symptom. Belief is the cause. Fear plays a central role in belief shaping. Systems often teach people what to fear before they tell them what to do. Fear of falling behind, fear of being replaced, fear of not being enough. When fear becomes a constant background noise, people seek certainty. They cling to metrics, rules, and hierarchies because those feel safe. In that environment, obedience feels like stability. Questioning feels dangerous. Over time, fear-trained beliefs make people choose compliance even when it harms them, because the alternative feels worse. The most effective systems don't just shape individual beliefs, they align them. When enough people share the same assumptions, those assumptions become culture. Culture then enforces behavior more powerfully than any policy ever could. A person who questions the system is no longer just challenging authority, they are challenging shared belief. That's when resistance becomes social, not just structural. People start saying things like, "That's just how it is," or "This is how you succeed," without realizing they are defending an idea rather than a fact. Yet belief is not fixed. It is learned, and what is learned can be unlearned. The moment someone asks why with genuine curiosity, the spell begins to weaken. Why do we measure success this way? Why is speed valued more than direction? Why do we reward leaders who deliver results but leave broken teams behind? These questions are uncomfortable because they threaten the belief system that keeps everything running smoothly. But they are also necessary because no system deserves loyalty simply because it exists. When people reconnect with purpose, behavior changes naturally but in the opposite direction. When someone believes their work matters beyond metrics, they act with care. When they believe leadership is about responsibility, they protect others. When they believe trust is more valuable than control, they choose transparency over manipulation. These behaviors don't need enforcement either. They emerge from alignment between belief and values. The real struggle, then, is not between people and systems, but between conscious belief and inherited belief, between choosing values intentionally and absorbing them passively. Systems will always try to shape beliefs, because belief shapes behavior. The question is whether individuals and leaders are willing to examine the beliefs they've been given, challenge the ones rooted in fear or convenience, and replace them with beliefs grounded in purpose, dignity, and service. Because the moment belief changes, behavior follows, and when enough people shift what they believe about success, leadership, and worth, the system that once shaped them begins to lose its grip, not through rebellion, but through quiet, collective redefinition of what truly matters. Burnout is not simply the result of working too much, nor is it a failure of time management or resilience. Burnout is what happens when effort is disconnected from meaning. It is the slow erosion of energy that occurs when people give their time, focus, and emotional labor to work that does not align with a deeper sense of purpose. When there is no clear reason why the work matters beyond survival, status, or external validation, the human system begins to shut down, not out of weakness, but out of self-protection. Human beings are remarkably capable of enduring hardship when they believe in what they are doing. History is filled with examples of people who worked long hours, faced uncertainty, and carried heavy responsibility without burning out, because their effort was anchored to something larger than themselves. What exhausts us is not the workload itself, but the feeling that the workload is empty. When days blur together with no connection to impact, growth, or contribution, motivation turns into obligation, and obligation drains far more than effort ever could. In many modern workplaces, people are asked to perform without understanding why their work exists in the first place. They are given tasks, targets, and deadlines, but rarely context. They are measured constantly, yet rarely meaningfully appreciated. Over time, this creates a sense of being used rather than valued. When people feel like interchangeable parts in a machine, they begin to emotionally disengage long before they physically stop showing up. Burnout often begins quietly, not with collapse, but with indifference. Purpose acts as a stabilizer. It gives effort direction. Without it, work becomes an endless loop of doing more to feel the same. Promotions lose their excitement, achievements feel hollow, and even success starts to feel heavy. This is why burnout can affect people who appear to be thriving. They may be well paid, respected, and outwardly successful, yet internally depleted. The rewards keep increasing, but the meaning owes not, and no amount of compensation can fill a purpose gap. A lack of purpose also distorts priorities. When people don't know why they are working, they default to whatever is rewarded most visibly. Speed replaces quality. Availability replaces effectiveness. Being busy replaces being useful. People push themselves not because the work demands it, but because the system celebrates exhaustion as commitment. Over time, this creates a culture where rest feels like failure and saying no feels risky. In such environments, burnout is not an anomaly, it is an outcome. Leaders play a critical role in this dynamic. When leaders themselves are disconnected from purpose, they manage by numbers alone. Conversations become transactional. People become outputs. The work may still get done, but something human is lost in the process. When leaders cannot articulate why the work matters, they cannot protect their teams from meaningless pressure. They pass stress downward instead of filtering it, and burnout spreads not because people are weak, but because they're unprotected. Burnout is also amplified when personal values and organizational values are misaligned. When people are asked to act in ways that conflict with their sense of integrity, even subtly, the internal cost is high. They may comply outwardly, but inwardly they experience friction. Over time, this friction becomes fatigue. The body carries what the mind suppresses. Emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and detachment are signals, not symptoms to be fixed, but messages to be understood. Purpose does not eliminate difficulty. It gives difficulty meaning. When people understand how their effort contributes to something real, they recover faster, collaborate more willingly, and remain engaged even under pressure. Purpose creates resilience not by demanding more, but by reminding people why the effort is worth it. Without that reminder, every challenge feels heavier, every setback more personal, and every demand more draining. Reconnecting work to purpose requires honesty. It requires asking difficult questions about what truly matters, what is being served, and who benefits from the work being done. It also requires leaders to listen, not just direct, and to design systems that support humans rather than consume them. Purpose cannot be imposed as a slogan. It must be experienced through consistent actions, trust, and care. When people feel their work has meaning, they don't need constant motivation. They bring energy because they see themselves in what they are building. Burnout fades not because the work becomes easier, but because it becomes clearer. The human mind can endure complexity, pressure, and uncertainty when it is grounded in purpose. But without that grounding, even simple tasks can feel unbearable, because working without purpose is not just tiring, it is disorienting. And the longer people remain in that state, the more exhaustion becomes their natural response to effort itself. Fear-driven leadership destroys trust and long-term success, because fear is a short-term motivator with long-term consequences. It may produce immediate compliance, quick results, and visible control, but it does so by eroding the very foundation that sustainable success depends on. When people act out of fear, they do only what is required, avoid responsibility, and protect themselves rather than the mission. The work may continue, but the spirit behind it begins to disappear. Fear-based leaders often believe they are maintaining high standards. In reality, they are creating fragile systems. When punishment, pressure, or constant urgency become the primary tools of leadership, people stop taking risks. Innovation declines because mistakes feel dangerous. Communication becomes guarded because honesty feels unsafe. Instead of solving problems, teams focus on avoiding blame. Over time, the organization may look disciplined on the surface, but underneath, it becomes brittle and reactive. Trust cannot coexist with fear. Trust requires psychological safety, the belief that one can speak up, make mistakes, and be human without negative consequences. Fear-driven environments remove that safety. People learn quickly what not to say, who not to challenge, and which truths to hide. Important information gets filtered or delayed, not because people are dishonest by nature, but because the cost of honesty feels too high. Leaders then make decisions with incomplete data and wonder why outcomes deteriorate. Fear also distorts relationships. When authority is maintained through intimidation, leaders are seen as threats rather than allies. This creates emotional distance. People may respect the position, but they do not feel loyalty to the person. They comply when watched and disengage when not. Commitment is replaced by calculation. The moment a safer or more rewarding opportunity appears, people leave, taking their experience and insight with them. In the long run, fear-based leadership creates dependence rather than capability. People wait to be told what to do because initiative feels risky. They stop thinking critically because questioning can be punished. Over time, leaders become bottlenecks, overwhelmed by decisions that their teams could have handled if trust had been present. The organization slows down, not because people are incapable, but because fear has trained them to be passive. Fear also spreads downward. Leaders under pressure often pass that pressure along, believing urgency equals effectiveness. What actually spreads is anxiety. Teams begin to operate in survival mode, focused on short-term wins rather than sustainable progress. Burnout increases, collaboration decreases, and internal competition replaces shared purpose. People may hit targets, but they do so at the expense of health, relationships, and long-term viability. One of the most damaging effects of fear-driven leadership is the erosion of moral courage. When people feel unsafe, they stay silent even when they see harm, inefficiency, or unethical behavior. They rationalize, disengage, or tell themselves it's not their responsibility. Over time, this silence becomes culture. Organizations lose their ability to self-correct because the very voices that could improve them have been muted. Long-term success depends on adaptability, and adaptability requires trust. Markets change, technologies evolve, challenges become more complex. No leader, no matter how skilled, can navigate this alone. Organizations that thrive are those where information flows freely, where people feel empowered to act, and where learning is continuous. Fear blocks all of this. It narrows thinking, discourages experimentation, and locks organizations into rigid patterns that cannot respond effectively to change. In contrast, leaders who lead with trust create environments where people choose to contribute. They set clear expectations, but offer support instead of threat. They hold people accountable without humiliation. They understand that discipline and compassion are not opposites. In such environments, people speak honestly, challenge ideas, and take responsibility not because they are afraid, but because they care. Trust-based leadership does not mean the absence of standards. It means standards are upheld through shared values rather than fear of consequences. When people understand why excellence matters and feel respected in the process, they hold themselves and each other accountable. This creates resilience. Teams recover from setbacks faster because they don't waste energy on blame. They focus on learning and improvement instead. Fear may look like control, but it is actually insecurity disguised as authority. Leaders who rely on fear often do so because they lack confidence in their people or themselves. Over time, this insecurity becomes self-fulfilling. The more fear they use, the less capable their teams become, reinforcing the belief that control is necessary. Breaking this cycle requires courage, humility, and a willingness to replace fear with trust. Because while fear can force people to move, only trust can make them move together, and without that shared movement, no success can truly last. Organizations thrive when people come before results, because results are always a lagging indicator of human behavior. Every outcome, whether positive or negative, is the product of decisions, relationships, and environments that shape how people show up to work each day. When organizations prioritize numbers without caring for the humans responsible for those numbers, performance may rise temporarily, but it will never sustain itself. When people are valued first, results follow naturally, consistently, and with far greater resilience. Putting people first does not mean ignoring accountability or lowering standards. It means understanding that high standards are best achieved in environments where people feel safe, respected, and supported. When individuals believe their leaders care about their well-being, they invest more of themselves into their work. They collaborate instead of compete. They solve problems instead of hiding them. They care about quality because they feel ownership, not because they fear punishment. Many organizations claim that people are their greatest asset, yet their systems tell a different story. They reward individual performance over teamwork. They celebrate speed over sustainability. They make decisions that look good on spreadsheets but quietly damage morale. Over time, people notice the gap between what leaders say and what they do. Trust erodes, and once trust is gone, even the most talented workforce struggles to perform at its best. When people are treated as expendable, they behave defensively. They protect their roles, their reputations, and their energy. Creativity declines because experimentation feels unsafe. Loyalty disappears because the relationship feels transactional. People give only what is required, not because they are lazy, but because the organization has taught them that going further is risky or unrewarded. Results in such environments become fragile, dependent on pressure rather than commitment. Organizations that put people first invest in relationships before outcomes. Leaders take time to listen, not just direct. They seek to understand challenges rather than dismiss them. This creates psychological safety, the condition where people feel comfortable speaking up, admitting mistakes, and offering ideas. Psychological safety is not a soft concept, it is a performance multiplier. Teams with high trust identify problems earlier, adapt faster, and outperform teams driven by fear and control. When people feel seen and valued, they bring more of themselves to work. They don't just complete tasks, they think, care, and contribute. They hold each other accountable because the work matters to them. This kind of accountability is stronger than any external enforcement because it comes from shared ownership. Results achieved this way are not only better, they are more sustainable because they are built on collective effort rather than individual pressure. Putting people before results also changes how organizations handle failure. Instead of punishment, there is learning. Instead of blame, there is reflection. People are encouraged to take responsibility without fear of humiliation. This creates a culture of continuous improvement. Mistakes become data, not damage. Over time, this approach leads to smarter decisions, stronger systems, and greater adaptability in the face of change. Short-term thinking often tempts leaders to sacrifice people for results, layoffs to boost quarterly numbers, unrealistic workloads to meet deadlines, silence in the face of burnout because the work still gets done. These choices may deliver immediate NS, but they leave scars. The cost shows up later in turnover, disengagement, and reputational damage. Organizations pay eventually for every time they choose results over people. Long-term success requires patience and consistency. Leaders who understand this resist the urge to optimize everything immediately. They know that trust takes time to build and moments to destroy. They design policies and incentives that encourage collaboration, well-being, and growth. They recognize that when people feel secure, they are more willing to take risks, challenge assumptions, and innovate, all of which are essential for long-term relevance. Putting people first also extends beyond employees. It shapes how organizations treat customers, partners, and communities. Cultures that value people internally tend to act with integrity externally. Decisions are made with consideration, not just calculation. This builds reputations that attract talent and loyalty. Over time, these organizations become known not just for what they produce, but for how they operate. Results matter, they are necessary, but they are not the starting point. They are the outcome of a system designed to support human potential. When leaders shift their focus from extracting performance to enabling people, something powerful happens. Energy replaces exhaustion. Trust replaces compliance. Purpose replaces pressure. Organizations stop chasing results and start earning them, because when people come first, results stop being forced and begin to emerge naturally from a culture where humans are not a means to an end, but the very reason the organization exists. Purpose-led leaders build systems that serve humanity back. They understand that leadership is not about control, status, or personal gain, but about responsibility. They recognize that systems are not neutral structures. They are expressions of values made visible through policies, incentives, and everyday decisions. When leaders are driven by purpose, they design systems that protect human dignity, encourage cooperation, and create long-term value rather than short-term extraction. A system reflects the mindset of those who build it. Leaders without purpose often create systems obsessed with efficiency, output, and speed, assuming that maximizing results automatically benefits people. purpose-led leaders reverse that logic. They start by asking how the system affects the lives of those within it. They consider how decisions influence trust, well-being, and meaning. They understand that when systems ignore human needs, performance eventually collapses, no matter how optimized the process appears. Serving humanity does not mean rejecting ambition or progress. It means redefining what progress looks like. Purpose-led leaders measure success not only by growth, but by impact. They ask whether their systems make people healthier, wiser, more capable, and more connected. They understand that technology, capital, and innovation are tools, not goals. Tools should serve people, not replace or diminish them. These leaders build systems that prioritize trust over control. Instead of assuming people must be monitored to perform, they assume people want to contribute when conditions are right. They design environments where transparency is normal, where information flows freely, and where decisions are explained rather than imposed. Trust reduces friction. It accelerates collaboration. It allows people to focus on solving real problems instead of navigating internal politics. Purpose-led systems also value long-term thinking. Leaders resist the pressure to sacrifice future stability for immediate gains. They know that systems designed solely for short-term results tend to externalize costs, often onto employees, communities, or the environment. Purpose-driven leaders take responsibility for those costs. They make choices that may be harder today, but create resilience tomorrow. This kind of leadership requires courage because it often means saying no to easy wins in favor of sustainable ones. Human-centered systems acknowledge that people are not machines. They account for emotional, psychological, and social realities. Purpose-led leaders build in space for rest, learning, and recovery, not as perks, but as necessities. They understand that creativity and judgment degrade under constant pressure. By respecting human limits, they unlock human potential. People who feel cared for do not need to be pushed, they move willingly. Serving humanity also means inclusion. Purpose-led leaders design systems that allow diverse voices to participate meaningfully. They recognize that insight is not tied to rank, and that innovation often comes from those closest to the problem. By inviting participation and listening with intent, they create systems that are smarter and more adaptable. People support what they help build, and systems shaped by many perspectives are better equipped to serve many needs. Ethics play a central role in purpose-led leadership. These leaders do not treat ethics as a constraint, but a compass. They understand that how results are achieved matters as much as the results themselves. Systems built without ethical grounding may succeed temporarily, but they corrode trust and legitimacy over time. Purpose-led leaders embed integrity into decision-making, ensuring that success does not come at the expense of others. When systems serve humanity, they extend beyond organizational boundaries. Purpose-led leaders consider their impact on customers, suppliers, and society at large. They recognize that businesses and institutions are part of larger ecosystems. Decisions ripple outward. Serving humanity means acknowledging interdependence and acting with responsibility toward the whole, not just the immediate stakeholders. Such leadership transforms the role of power. Power becomes a means of stewardship rather than dominance. Leaders use authority to create safety, clarity, and opportunity. They remove obstacles rather than create them. They see themselves as caretakers of the system, accountable for its effects on human lives. This mindset changes how decisions are made, how conflicts are handled, and how success is defined. Purpose-led systems do not eliminate struggle or complexity, they provide meaning within it. People still work hard, face challenges, and make difficult choices, but they do so with a sense of contribution rather than exploitation. When people believe the system exists to serve something greater than profit or prestige, they bring more care, more honesty, and more commitment. Over time, these systems earn trust not through slogans, but through consistency, because serving humanity is not an initiative or a strategy. It is a way of thinking that shapes every choice, every policy, and every interaction, forming systems that exist not to consume people, but to support them as they work, create, and live within structures designed with purpose at their core. At its core, this is not a conversation about systems, leadership, or work. It is a conversation about responsibility. The responsibility to question what we've been taught to accept, the responsibility to choose purpose over convenience, people over pressure, and long-term good over short-term gain. Systems will always try to shape what we believe because belief shapes behavior. But the moment we become conscious of that influence, we regain our agency. We remember that leadership is not a rank, burnout is not a badge of honor, fear is not a strategy, and results are not the reason we exist. The future will not be built by those who work the hardest or move the fastest, but by those who remember why they started and who they serve. When individuals reconnect to purpose, when leaders protect trust, and when organizations design systems that honor humanity, something shifts. Work becomes meaningful. Leadership becomes, say, a vice. Progress becomes shared. And in choosing to lead with purpose, we don't just change outcomes, we change the kind of world those outcomes create.